Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome back. It is time again for another edition of the Weekly Member Spotlight. It feels like 100 years since I have been here doing the Weekly Member Spotlight, so I'm super excited to be back. Before we get started, just wanted to say thank you to everyone who attended the Day at the Races last Friday. We held off on doing a Weekly Member Spotlight because of that event. Had a lot of fun, saw a lot of fun pictures on social media, so thank you for joining us. Our next event coming up is the B&B Riverboat Cruise, and that's July 12th. We still have some space available, though it's limited. So if you're interested in joining us on July 12th, please give us a call today and we'll get you registered for that. One more piece of business before we get into our interview, which I am super excited about this morning. So excited, Jeremiah. I wanted to just make mention and say congratulations to Jacob Paff with Village Green. Jacob is a service technician at the Paddock Club Apartments, and he is qualified again for the NAA Maintenance Mania. So stay tuned. We'll have some more information coming up on that. But that event is the week of June 22nd in Denver at the NAA Education Conference. All right, well, without further ado, Jeremiah, you ready to get started?
I'm ready, let's do it.
Thank you so much, first of all, for agreeing to be here. If you would, you are one of our newest members, so I want everyone to pay very close attention, get to know Jeremiah a little bit. Would you just take a few minutes and introduce yourself, tell everyone who you are, who you work for, and then how you got into this industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my name is Jeremiah Hines. I went to Northern Kentucky University, originally from Louisville, but I came to Northern Kentucky and decided that I loved it and that I was going to stay. It kind of stole my heart, so I stayed up here, and there's a long backstory, but I guess to start at the tail end of that right now, I work for a company called Flow Property Management. It's a company that I started with my real estate broker. I'm a licensed real estate agent. And then a local property owner in Northern Kentucky. It's got a very established reputation. So right now it's a new company. So I started it right out of college, and right now we've got about 80 residential units and 80,000 square feet of commercial space. And I manage 4 short-term rentals right now, like Airbnb, VRBO, things like that. So that's kind of a snapshot of where I am now, but leading up to that, and I told the story, I guess, in the written form, but I owe a lot of it to my father. He worked as a safety coordinator at a steel mill, and worked there for a really long time, and he was always really creative, had a good entrepreneurial itch. He was always coming up with different ideas, but never acted upon it until I was probably 10 years old. I'm the youngest of my siblings, and my father was maybe 45, 50 years old. And so he went to some conference about fix and flips, and he got fired up and was like, okay. And then he would go to Half Price Books and just buy stacks of real estate books, and his library is incredible in the basement of just everything that he's read. So he started his business, started buying real estate, and then started holding real estate, and was eventually, when I was in college, able to quit, and then him and my mom just run the business full time. And so I looked at my dad and I was like, he can do it.
Right.
Anybody can do it. And so he always encouraged me. You know, I was kind of young hearing him on his journey, and he was always excited about real estate and owning businesses and reading books. And so I really kind of developed a love for learning and a love for real estate. So I went to school, studied entrepreneurship, and then I did a lot of internships throughout college. I worked for a guy who bought raw land and sold it to Love's Truck Stops. So he just developed kind of raw pads, and then I worked for a small developer in Covington doing single-family remodels. Did a lot of construction work. I flipped a house in college over in Park Hills. Me and my dad bought it, and I flipped it. In the summer, I slept on a bed upstairs. I would cover my bed in plastic every single morning so that the dust didn't get all over my pillow. And yeah, so it was a really exciting journey, but that's led me now to starting Flow Property Management and kind of pushing the Airbnb rental management a little bit, which is really exciting.
A lot about that, which I think is fascinating, and certainly the way the world's going to work in the very near future. So that's exciting. How did you come to join the Apartment Association in Cincinnati?
So I met with a gentleman. He's got a company that manages student. Actually, they own, I think, maybe 40 or 60 properties around UC.
Okay.
And they all do student housing. And I met with him and was just talking. I heard that he did student rentals. That was something that interested me while I was in college. And so I was talking with him, and he was like, hey, if you're not a part of the Apartment Association, you should at least go check it out. I feel like that's the kind of people that you would want to be talking to. And so I went to I went and toured Rent Manager's office with Jeremy Moore and Abby Huffman. And Abby was like, "What? Yeah, hi, Abby." Abby was like, "Man, if you're not part of the apartment association, you need to come." And I was like, "Okay, that's twice now I've heard about it, so I guess I have to go." So I went to, it used to be Champions of Leadership at the Encore in downtown Cincinnati, and that was pretty cool. But at the time, I didn't have the time to dive into it. That was fall of my senior year of college. So then last, I guess, March, I went to the annual dinner, and I was like, "Okay, now's the time." So I went to the annual dinner. And it was awesome. I met a couple really cool people, and Abby was like, "Okay, well, we're going to go to D.C. in 3 weeks." And I was like, "All right, I'm going with you." So I booked my plane ticket and flew out to D.C. I'm pretty adventurous. I love traveling with people I don't know because it's a really good way to get to know people. So we went down there and hung out for a few days, and I got to meet a bunch of really cool people. I mean, Jed Osherwitz was there. I got to know him quite a bit more. And just a bunch of really interesting people. Had a really good time. Really felt like I connected with a lot of the team there. And then I got back and decided to try to dive into Next Gen a little bit. So I've just been slowly kind of figuring out what's what and getting involved.
Well, I was talking to you this morning a little bit about this. I think it's just incredible that you have really just dove right into the association, and you've not really waited for people to kind of get you involved. You're like, where can I go be involved, and really trying to learn. And I just think that's, it's unusual, and it's inspiring. So thank you for that. And we appreciate all of your involvement and the perspective that you bring.
Absolutely.
One of the questions that I have for you, and I want to kind of flip it a couple of ways here, but my first question is, what's some really great advice that you have received coming into this industry as the next generation? That's you.
Sure. So I don't know if this would be necessarily industry-specific advice, but just, I guess, some general wisdom that somebody gave me once is, they said, if you picture yourself like a raw, just a rough cut piece of wood. If you've ever seen rough cut lumber, there's splinters everywhere. It's just very rough and raw. And then they said every conflict, every person that you meet that you don't get along with, every trial that you face, any disasters that come about in your business is just somebody sanding some of that rough off of the edges. And they said it's always painful. It always sucks. It always wears you down. But that wearing down process is what makes you smoother and more dynamic and more well-rounded. And that was something that was always just, I think, a really healthy, helpful perspective for me to have. Is, anytime I have a problem with a tenant, or anytime I have a maintenance, I get called on a Sunday and there's water coming through the ceiling, it's like, you know what? It's just sandpaper. Like if I can understand how to better approach these kind of issues, that just makes me more well-rounded. And so I generally tend to have a pretty rosy outlook on life, and I guess it kind of shows with that. But that was something, just really helpful advice that I received.
I like that. Good perspective. Well, what perspective would you offer to the next generation of industry professionals? Yeah,
so one of the things as I was thinking through these that I thought would be really valuable is that by and large, again, I know I have a really rosy perspective on a lot of things, but from my personal experience, anybody that is established in an industry and has a lot of experience didn't get to where they are without great mentors and great people that have that experience pouring into them. And so in turn, most of them are willing to pour into me and any other young professionals in the industry. But the problem is that they're always busy. So they're, with few exceptions, most people aren't sitting around thinking, all right, how can I challenge Jeremiah? How can I push him? What opportunities can I give him? I have a few very dear people in my life that do that for me, and that's awesome. But for the most part, I have to know what I want and how people can help me. And so, if I can shoot somebody an email and say, hey, could you meet for coffee? I have these specific questions I'd love to run by you and get your input on. Then, it's a lot easier for them to say, yeah, sure, swing by my office for 30 minutes and I'll run you through it. And I've got a lot of, I was actually here with BRG yesterday, meeting with somebody, just asking them questions about property management. And so I think what I would say is, don't be afraid to ask for what you want and what you need, and have a specific ask. Most people aren't sitting around trying to figure out how they can make your life better, but they're more than willing to help. if you can tell them how they could help. So I think that would probably be my biggest piece of advice.
Fantastic advice, and you're absolutely right.
Yeah, thank you.
So being in the business, even for 3 years, I'm sure you've had some great stories and experiences. What's one of the more memorable property management stories that you have?
Yeah, so and this is something I wrote down that my young age in the industry shows a little bit. I haven't had any disastrous tenants yet. I mean, that's just a huge blessing.
It's going to be a really big piece of sandpaper.
That's going to be a big piece of sandpaper. I'm very sure. But I think one of the first stories that came to mind is I've got a maintenance man, mm-hmm. and he's more aged than I am, and he's seen a lot of life. When he was younger, he got into some trouble or whatever. Just a very, very seasoned individual, and whenever I was in college, a lot of the maintenance work I did personally, just to get extra hours. And so we were working in an apartment. I was painting in one bedroom, and he was painting over in the living room, and we were just talking, and I was complaining about something. I don't remember what it was. I was probably whining. And I just hear him, and he's in there. He stops painting, and he says, "Young man," he said, "if there was no such thing as problems, there'd be no reason to get out of bed in the morning." And I sat back, and I was like, that was surprisingly perceptive. And before I even said anything, I hear him stand up, and he's like, "Damn, that was good, Robert. Oh, that was a good one." And I just remember cracking up at that, and that's, I think, probably one of my favorite things is your frontline people tend to often have a much more clear, sometimes unpolished perspective, but a lot of the times they're very perceptive and insightful, which has just been one of my favorite things.
Stiff drinks are the most effective, right?
Right, for sure.
Well, can we switch gears and get into your personal life just a little bit?
Absolutely.
Well, tell us about your family. Let's start there.
Yeah, so I guess my closest family is my wife. We got married pretty much right out of college. So I graduated college about this time last year, mm-hmm. and then got married on June 20th. I hope that's right. 22nd. Anyway, I know it's bad.
I'm so
I'm not gonna let my wife watch this. Anyway, so we got married right after graduation, and she's just been phenomenal. She's super encouraging and supportive, which I need that. I tend to be pretty hard on myself, and she's very encouraging and supportive, and is just such a servant, and I don't know, she's just been perfect. And so she so I guess I couldn't say enough good things about her. I mean, this whole year, a lot of people say your first year is the hardest. Maybe we'll have more rocky roads in the future, but this has been incredible. I don't know. So she's a great communicator, and I love my wife. And then my family, I know I talk about my dad a lot. He's a rock star. He's been super encouraging as well. I've got 3 older sisters, which was pretty interesting growing up, which was cool.
No wonder you've got such rosy perspective. You've had all of the sisters.
I guess so, yeah. I grew up with a bunch of females. Yeah, it was awesome.
Well, are you an avid reader?
I am an avid podcaster and audio booker. I listen to a lot of audiobooks. I don't tend to make a lot of time at the end of the night to just sit, but I'm in the car quite a bit to and from work, mm-hmm. and so my phone's on Bluetooth, so as soon as I sit down in the car, it starts playing whatever I was listening to last.
What's one of the most memorable books or podcasts that you've listened to recently?
It's a good question. So the majority of the podcasts that I listen to are either long-term property management related or short-term property management related. I listen to a lot of Airbnb podcasts, and I listen to a lot of property management podcasts. So for those, there haven't been any super life-altering things that I've learned, but they've been super helpful as I am just diving into the industry, mm-hmm. to hear the talk that everybody else is talking about and to hear of the new technologies. I mean, I wouldn't be able to be running my Airbnb business without podcasts, because there's just so many helpful ancillary technologies that come alongside Airbnb and other mm-hmm. short-term rental platforms that I've been able to learn about from my podcasts. So from the podcast side, I think, just a lot of those type of podcasts. And then from the reading side, I just got done with a book called The Road Back to You, mm-hmm. And then there was a second one that I read that followed it called The Road Between Us, and both of those are about the Enneagram, which is a personality test, maybe similar to the is it Myers-Briggs or like a disc profile, and that was super helpful because I see things through my perspective and through my set of glasses, and it's really nice. I always say that nobody does anything that's unrealistic to them.
Right.
And so sometimes I'll see people and be like, that just makes no sense.
Right.
But I really appreciate being able to understand everybody's personalities maybe a little bit better and see why someone may act the way they do.
Right.
So I think that those 2 books were really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not the most influential books I've ever read, but definitely definitely helpful, the most recent books I've been reading.
Being in this business, when you have a better understanding of why people behave the way they behave and what that means to you, your job will be easier because you're dealing with people in such an intimate way in our business.
Exactly.
They live with you. Your customers live with you. So what do you do in your pastime?
I love being outdoors. So I grew up on a farm. We didn't have any animals. We were just wild and hunted and rode 4-wheelers and played around outside. So anything that I can do, I love to hike. In fact, at the end of the day today, I'm going down to Red River Gorge to go camping with friends, and I like to ski in the wintertime. I like rock climbing and a little bit of hunting, so pretty much anything where I can be outdoors and be a little adventurous.
I couldn't tell that from the pictures that you shared.
I know, yeah, sorry, I was like, is this too much? But
No,
that's like all the
not at all.
pictures I had of myself, so I was like, okay.
Oh, that's funny. What's one of your favorite foods or local restaurants?
So I really like Mexican food. I am allergic to gluten, so I have celiac. So I can do Mexican pretty easily. There's not a lot of flour.
Chips and salsa.
Yeah, so I cannot do a lot of tortillas and stuff, but everything else I can do. There's a great place down in Newport called La Mexicana, and it's a real small little place. They've got a Latino grocery store in the back. It's a kind of a mom and pop kind of place, but the food is absolutely delicious.
Okay, I didn't know that about you.
Yep.
What's your favorite movie or TV show?
Favorite movie is, and I couldn't tell you why. It's not necessarily similar to anything else that I watch, but I love this movie called The Majestic.
Okay.
It's a Jim Carrey movie. It was probably filmed maybe in the 90s or early 2000s, but it's a totally serious role for him. He's not comedic at all, which is kind of odd, but
Can't even imagine.
it takes place in the 1950s. He restores an old theater, and it's got a lot of politics and a lot of that, and just good American values. It's a fun movie. It's got a lot of really good big bands, swing and jazz music, which I really like. So
I hadn't heard of that movie. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Well, do you follow sports at all? And if so, who's your team?
My team, I really don't. I don't watch a lot of sports, but whenever I do, it would probably be either NKU or FC Cincinnati.
Right.
Maybe the Reds. So local teams that I at least have a couple ties to. I really appreciate.
Okay. What's one of the best concerts you've been to lately?
The best concerts. So growing up, I played piano. I played classical piano in high school. I took lessons, and so I really appreciate jazz and orchestra music just from a lot of the training I had in high school. So I went and saw John Williams conduct the Louisville Orchestra with all of his film score musics from Jaws and Harry Potter and Star Wars, and just a lot of great films, and it was absolutely beautiful.
What do you listen to if you're in the car? What kind of music?
If I'm in the car, yeah. So generally it's podcasts is my go-to. But if I'm listening to music, if it's not something that's on the radio, it would probably either be really old swing music from like the 30s to the 50s, or film score music.
Interesting.
So,
Very
bit
interesting.
of a nerd with that.
Well, you had, I think, my favorite answer to this question so far. If you were an animal, what would you be and why?
Yeah. So if I was an animal,
He's getting serious.
I would be an eagle for a couple reasons. One, because eagles are just baller and they represent America, and I love America. Number two, they can fly quickly, which I've always thought would be fascinating, of course. And third, and more realistically, is that they're protected. And I would last a lot longer in the wilderness than my other unprotected species.
I like that.
So,
well, share some interesting detail about yourself that we wouldn't otherwise know.
Yeah, so I think maybe one of the things that has been the most helpful throughout my, as you say, short entrepreneurial journey is my faith. So I'm a Christian, and so for me that just means that the most important thing about what I do is honoring God with my business and loving and taking care of the people that are around me, whether that be my vendors or whether that be my employees. And at the end of the day, if I'm doing those two things well, then everything else can sort itself out. And so I think a lot of times, I mean, I know personally it's easy for me to find my joy and contentment in, the next contract that I land or, the money that I bring home. But all of those things, I mean, failure is necessary for success. So all those things are very fluctuating. And so for me, it's helpful to be able to kind of recalibrate and say, look, as long as I'm honoring God with my business and loving the people that are around me, that all of the other fine details will just work themselves out, which is help provide a lot of peace and hopefully will help me keep my hair a little bit longer.
Well, I admire you very much and for saying that out loud and for kind of living that and demonstrating that. So good for you. And I think it's obvious why you've had such success early on. So good for you.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, one more question. We'll let you get about your day and get ready for your big camping trip this weekend. So we've reached out to a couple of folks that you've worked with throughout your career, but what do you think people would say about who you are as a professional?
Sure. I think that something that they would say, maybe a couple things, is that I listen really well. Hopefully. That's what I strive for. I'm very quiet usually at work, a lot more than I am socially, because I'm just listening and watching what's going on. I try to be very perceptive and intuitive. So I think maybe a good listener would be one, and then caring would be the other that I would hope people would recognize, as I really like to take good care of my maintenance guy. He's my only employee right now. But I've got another girl that works part-time, and I want their quality of life to be as good as mine, because I think that that's the best way to run a business. So those would be the two things.
Well, great. Well, thank you. It's been such a pleasure to get to know you over the last couple of months, and I was looking forward to sitting down with you. We're going to share a written post about Jeremiah and some photos of him and his family and his outdoor activities a little bit later this afternoon, so make sure you watch for that. And I would be remiss if I didn't put out the offer again. If you're interested or know someone who might be interested in being a feature of the Weekly Member Spotlight, please reach out and get a hold of us. We are scheduling out. We would love to get the rest of this year scheduled out. We would come to you even. I don't know if you saw a couple of weeks ago, Rachel did an interview out in the field, which was really fun. So we are working on our technology to make that a little more easier, and we'd love to get to know more of you through this Weekly Member Spotlight feature. Have a great weekend, everybody, and see you next week.
Thank you.